leans in and I lean in to see what he's showing me, and boom, he hits me in the face with a crescent wrench.
So it became well known in my high school that I had an abortion. It wasn't even like something I could hide.
You know, his eyes are welling up with tears, and he puts the plate down and just says, with his voice breaking, "Thank you for your service and welcome home."
Hey, I'm Sarah Blaine.
And I'm Evan Clark.
And welcome to our second episode of the Humanist Experience, the podcast series where we seek out radical experiences that educate our emotions and expand our world.
This week, we wanted to take a step back and explore what a humanist experience actually is.
What separates it from our day-to-day experience?
Why does it impact our identity and make us change how we go about our lives?
But to answer those questions, we first have to find a solid definition for experience.
Experience is like when you go and do something, you get to see how it feels to do that one thing.
That was Sarah's 13-year-old daughter, Lois. Her big life experiences so far are things like algebra homework and arguing with her 7-year-old brother. But her definition of experience, it was my favorite we recorded.
Yeah, what stands out is that she chose to incorporate our feelings into the definition, so it recognizes the human element. And others we interviewed seem to share this perspective.
How would you define experience? I would define experience as, I guess you can talk about experiences, anything that happens to you, but for me personally, when I talk about experience, it's something that it doesn't just happen. It's something that you're involved in and that you have emotions attached to. Any experience is something that leaves an impact on you in your life.
That was Corey Harris, who you'll remember from our first episode. He's a He is a two-tour Iraq combat veteran and the Veterans Field Representative for Congressman Ruben Gallego.
Listening to his definition, he emphasizes emotions, like Lois, and he describes experiences as things that have an impact on our lives. So we asked him a follow-up question.
What was the best experience you've had so far today?
The best thing was driving over here listening to U2, the CD that I just bought the other day that I haven't had for about 5 years and I've missed. And that was easily the best thing that happened today.
Without a doubt, Corey's car ride listening to U2 was an experience. It was a good one. He interacted with something. He had an emotional reaction. In this case, his reaction was happiness.
We're starting to understand what makes something an experience.
But what separates an everyday experience from a life-changing one?
Why don't we change our careers or end our bad relationships after every little experience, after every CD purchase?
To understand that, we felt we had to understand the distance between ordinary and defining experiences.
So we decided to collect the most life-changing experiences we could find. We approached a few of our friends, and this episode explores some of their stories.
My title is Deputy Director of Normal in Arizona and Field Coordinator for Arizonans for Safe Access. There's other things I do, but those are the two title positions.
That is Michael Weiser, a progressive activist in Arizona.
He is also a board member for Democracy of America, Maricopa County. He's run for Congress in the 4th Congressional District in Arizona. And he's an honorary board member for the Arizona State Poetry Society. This
man is filled with intense life experiences he could have shared.
I was a carny, and I was a plumber for an extended period of time, helped run a homeless shelter. It was a lot of freelance writing.
But one story he chose to share with us, it stood above the rest. It was one he used to perform to students each year when he was a teacher.
We need to make a quick note that this story includes some violence and abusive language, so if you're around young children or not interested in hearing it, you might want to skip ahead about 7 minutes.
Now to the story.
Before I tell you guys this story, first I got to admit that I used to be a drug addict. I was addicted to tobacco. I was smoking about a pack a day when I was in college in my early 20s, and at that point, I was pretty unusually dressed. I basically walked around in a bathing suit and a blanket. And I was living with my best friend in a college town in South Texas, Edinburgh, Texas. And he had actually been my best friend from high school. He had come out as gay. And at first, we'd been friends for a long time. It turned out that he had a crush on me. And so I went ahead and tried it, see if this was going to work. It wasn't going to work like romantically or sexually, but we were still good friends, and we continued to live together, various arrangements. And so one day I go into the local store to get some tobacco. Now, there's not many stores in my neighborhood. There's one that's in walking distance, easy walking distance. And I go bopping in the store, wearing my blanket and a bathing suit. And it's the South Texas, puro Chicano, 85% Hispanic. So Hispanic is the dominant culture. A guy comes in dressed like a cholo, which is not meant to be, that's not an insulting term in the culture. He is got his hair slicked back, hairnet, gold tooth, white beater t-shirt, 5 pounds of bling, pants are high, shiny shoes. He's decked out, tattoos. I'm impressed. He's got his act together. So, dude, you look good. And he turns to me and goes, "Are you a faggot?" "No, man, I'm just complimenting your look." "Are you trying to pick me up?" "No." And he chases me out of the store. I go back and get my cigarettes later. It turns out that that's his turf, that's his area, and that's his base of operations. So unfortunately for me, the only time I can get cigarettes is when he's not around. Well, one Saturday night, we're down at the beach. We've been at the beach all day. I ran out of cigarettes in the afternoon. Get back to the house. I'm scrambling through the cushions, rush down to the store, don't even notice, and go in and buy my cigarettes, light one up, and as I'm turning to leave, boom, he's between me and the door. I said, "Man, please believe me, I'm not gay. I'm not trying to pick you up. I was giving you a compliment. I believe that people should give each other compliments. Don't you? I mean, it's not a mean thing to give you a compliment. You put a lot of time and money and energy into that. I was just giving you props. Let me go on my way, and you go on your way, and everything's going to be fine." He says, "Forget all that stuff. Come out back, and I'll show you something." And I'm like, "Yay. He's not going to be mad at me. Yay." We're just going to go out back, and I go, and he says, come here, look." And we're behind the 7-Eleven in the alley. He leans in, and I lean in to see what he's showing me, and boom, he hits me in the face with a crescent wrench. It's a 10-inch crescent wrench. Hits me on the left side of my face. The studio audience can see that I have a little moon-shaped scar over there. That's where the wrench hit, and it did what they call a tripodial break, which broke my bone in 3 places and poked it out underneath my eye. Hit me so hard, I stumbled back, I fell down, and I kid you not, I fell into the backyard of a cemetery. Not a cemetery, a funeral home. And I'm like, oh, Jesus. He jumps on my chest, pins down my arm. This eye fills with blood, so I can't see. Blood in the ear. And he starts poking me in the face with the wrench about how I'm such a faggot and how he's got to kill me and how, terrible for the world. I'm absolutely paralyzed. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm witnessing my death. The world gets loud. It gets that life or death moment, if people know what I'm talking about. And my thought is, what do you do now? Oh, I better have my last cigarette. And I realize I still have my cigarette in my hand. So while he's screaming at me, I reach around and start puffing on this cigarette. And if you've ever been really nervous and tried to smoke, you smoke the whole thing instantly. And within, I don't know how long, the cigarette's already burned down. It hasn't killed me yet. And I still want more cigarette because I'm scared. And but the problem is where he's sitting, he's actually his lap is on my cigarette pack in my shirt, If he thought I was gay before, what's he going to think if I reach into his lap? Do I have any choices? So I go, excuse me, but if you're going to keep going, can I get another cigarette? And he goes, don't you know I'm going to kill you? And I said, don't you know I can't be any more afraid? But I still want another cigarette. And light goes off in his mind. He goes, wait, you're not gay. You're just stupid. Why'd you come back here? Is this because you asked me to? And he's, shit. And he gets up and he pokes my bum back in my face, finds my broken glasses, and I didn't see him again. I never saw him again. I got vision back in the eye in a couple of days. The doctors, when I went to the emergency room, not that night, but the next day, they said, you're probably not going to see again. But it came back. And when I was in the Navy, they ground down the bone from the inside so it stopped cutting my skin open. And I told this story to students, like every class for 12 years. Be sure that they knew how intense people can feel about ooh, gay is awful, and be totally wrong. Be sure that they understand how much power they have to hurt someone unreasonably, and check yourself.
What makes Michael's anti-gay hate crime story different from Corey's story about listening to U2 isn't just a matter of degrees.
This is a story that seasoned Michael's judgment and heightened his sympathies.
His life changed because the lens through which he looked at life changed.
Our next story is by director of NARAL Pro-Choice Arizona, Kat Sabine.
Kat has devoted her life to making sure women have access to safe, affordable abortions.
Her life-changing experience, which we're about to play, explains what inspired her career choice and why she calls herself a feminist.
Warning, this story includes
an abortion.
So I was 14, and I did not realize that my family relationships and what was happening in my family could cause me to get pregnant in other relationships. And so at 14, I had my first boyfriend and immediately got pregnant and didn't know I was pregnant and didn't realize I was pregnant. And my mother was an emergency room recovery room nurse, and I think she knew pretty quickly, but was probably in denial herself. And so at about 6 months, she took me to see her friend who was a doctor. After hours, I had a pregnancy test and I was pregnant, and then proceeded to have an abortion, but it was clandestine. It was after hours. My mother was the nurse instead of his staff, so it wasn't on the books or on the record. And there are several different ways to have an abortion. People talk about abortion as a monolithic experience, but actually there are several. Now there's medication abortion, and there's vacuum suction, and there's D&C versions of abortion. I should have had a D&C, but I did not. I had a vacuum suction abortion, but I was too far along to have had that procedure appropriately. So I didn't know what was happening to me, of course, because I was so young and foolish in the first place to not know I was pregnant and not know what was happening. And so a few days after the initial abortion experience, I actually miscarried the rest of the fetus in my high school bathroom. So it became well known in my high school that I had an abortion. It wasn't even like something I could hide, because I started to finish miscarrying in my PE class. And so it was a pretty traumatic event for me and life-changing in a lot of ways. There was a lot of, in the 80s, there was a lot of slut-shaming around having sex in the first place. And it was the very beginning of abstinence-only education. So my high school was very much a part of that movement and very engaged in it. So I had some teachers who were nasty to me and many of my classmates. But it actually in turn made me this person who became really educated about sex. So what ended up happening was people found out I had an abortion. They thought then somehow that I was an expert. So they would say terrible things to me, like in the hallways, but I would also then find notes in my backpack or like shoved in my locker, asking me questions about how to get birth control, how to get an abortion, like all kinds of questions. People started feeding me like a lot of feminist information, and I became like, it was like a lightning bolt of radicalization for me. So I went from being, I always laugh about being a poor white trash child, but I really came from this environment where there was no expectation that I go to school. There was no expectation that I should get an education or that I should do better than my family. And I instantly was, college bound, going to school, really, challenged and significantly changed by it. And it changed the whole course of my life after that. I'm not really sure where I would have gone prior to that experience, but one of my high school friends I was talking to on the phone recently was like, when are you going to stop talking about, having abortions and birth control? And I was like, when people stop needing them.
I love that story. Kat's story didn't just change the lens through which she looked at the world. It dramatically expanded that world, and it changed the course of her life.
It was a lightning bolt of radicalization that moved her to do what she could for other women who needed information and access to abortion care.
So, life-changing experiences, like the ones we've been listening to, can expand our circle of concern and inspire us to do something.
They take us from people knowing about issues to people caring about the issues.
Next, we'll be hearing from Carol Moss, a businesswoman and political organizer in the eastern suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona.
Well, probably the last time I cried so hard was when my father passed. Yeah. And probably because of the helpless feeling. And I think all children would probably, no matter what the age, but especially when your parents get older and the role has reversed a little bit in the sense that you are their spokesperson when they need any help financially or medically, whatever is going on in their life. And you try and play that role. And it was a helpless feeling to watch my dad physically decline, and also to the last, few days where he went down. And you just don't know what to do. I mean, you hear what the doctors have to say, and you don't want them in pain, your loved one in pain. You don't necessarily want to give them up, but then you realize that, at 89 years of age, how much more can they go through? And it's just the helpless feeling of wanting, someone to live, but knowing that those decisions are now with you as to what the next course of action should be. And like I said, it was helpless. It was helpless. And I can only imagine what a parent, even with a young child, must feel like when they've been terminally diagnosed and there's not anything they can do if they've got cancer or something like that. You feel responsible, but yet there's so little you can do sometimes. And, that's that helplessness. That's probably the hardest.
The empathy in that story is so palpable. Carol says that she can only imagine what a parent goes through when their young child is diagnosed with a terminal illness.
But the humanist aspect of that story is that she does imagine it. This imaginative reconstruction of someone else's suffering, it's the core of compassion.
It really is. And when we identify with others in similar circumstances, when we have experiences that really motivate us to help, these experiences, they're how we learn compassion.
For our final story, we're going to return to our good friend Corey Harris. This is a story about him returning from the war in Iraq and what led him to a career supporting veterans.
So I deployed to Iraq in 2003 and came back in 2004. This was during the initial invasion into Iraq. And when we got home, we didn't know what we were coming back to. They put us on a bus leaving, El Paso, and we were driving into Arizona. And as soon as we crossed over the border, there was a mob of police cars and fire trucks and all wailing their sirens, and they escorted us all the way through all of northern Arizona. And every town that we went through, the entire town must have shut down because they had everybody out waving flags and playing music. And for us, it was just a surreal experience to come back to this after being in Iraq. At the end of it, we stopped in Show Low, and there was a VFW that was there, Veterans of Foreign War, and I had no experience with them before. I think I'd heard of them, and I think, like a lot of people, I had an idea of what I thought about Vietnam-era veterans, and it wasn't positive in terms of how they were treated or the war and everything else. It just wasn't a positive association. So when we got there, we were served lunch by VFW members. And I remember a piece of me thinking, not my best moment. It's kind of weird that they're here, reliving their war, through us. And it was just a very aloof, weird feeling that I had. So then, as they were serving us, and I'm reflecting on how I'm thinking about this, I realized that one of the guys coming over has a pin from Vietnam, from his service in Vietnam. And as he's passing out the plates of food, I just said to him, this has to be a lot different than it was for you coming home. I don't know if that was atonement or if that was whatever I needed to do to understand his experience, but I just realized, I don't know. And it just struck me that this must be different. So he stopped mid putting the plate down, and he told me a story about coming back from Vietnam. And he said that he and his very good friend from high school had joined together to fight the communist threat. And they had, after 2 heavy combat tours, they came home to protesters in Flagstaff. And they were yelling and throwing rocks. And one of those rocks hit his friend in the head, who then went to a hospital and ended up dying of that wound that he received. And that's when he stops telling the story. His eyes are welling up with tears, and he puts the plate down and just says, with his voice breaking, "Thank you for your service and welcome home." And that struck me, that this guy who clearly had an awful experience coming back, who could hate his nation, could hate for the way that they treated him, could hate the military for sending him to a war that he may not necessarily have been happy about going to, or even be jealous of us coming back and getting the kind of welcome home that he never got. Instead, turn that around into a positive experience, all that pain, and what I imagine was a lifetime of shame about this war, and to turn it into, we want this experience to be different for you coming back.
Corey is a wealth of information about veterans. He could give you long lists of statistics about things like veterans' unemployment, healthcare, PTSD.
But when Corey talks about why he cares about veterans, why he's dedicated his career to working with these vets, he just doesn't give you those lists. He tells that one story.
Yeah, and it's a story that puts statistics into context, an experience that makes those numbers matter to us and to Corey. So much so, in fact, that story underpins his life's work.
Yeah, after experiencing that, I don't know, for me, it really turned a corner in my head about the difficulty that a lot of veterans can have coming back. And I actually had a hard time coming back and readjusting. And I was able to make it look like to my family and friends that I was doing well and I was just busy, when really I was isolating. I was not talking to anybody. And it took another veteran that saw through my BS to start coming over and knocking on my door and waking me up in the morning and saying, "All right, we're going to go out. We're going to go work on something together. We're going to go work on a veteran project. We're going to go for a run, or well, not in the morning, but hey, we're going to go have a drink." having that experience from veterans that helped me deal with the difficulty that I had, really, it turned a corner for me in what I wanted to do with my career.
The Humanist Experience is a podcast where we'll explore the world by engaging in it as directly as we can.
Taking inspiration from life-changing experiences like the ones you've just heard, we've started asking questions like,
what information do we need to be good people?
how do we become more compassionate?
When we make decisions about ethics, do our brains just plug facts into a formula?
Or do we filter those facts through our experience?
How do we put them into a context that helps us process them?
And beyond learning more facts, can we also gather more context?
And what we're discovering is the truth value of a fact just doesn't help us understand it.
We need to have the right facts, but it's a story, a context, an experience. That's how we learn to understand.
So our goal with this podcast is to step outside of our comfort zone. It's to take on new, maybe even radical experiences.
We'll gather context to plug our facts into.
And we'll take you along for the journey. If all goes well, together we'll educate our emotions and expand our world. And say experience way too many times.
Experience. And as a wise 13-year-old once taught us, experience isn't just about doing something new. It's also about seeing how it feels to do something.
Experience is like when you go and do something, you get to see how it feels to do that one thing.
If you would like to support the work of the folks you heard in this episode, please visit our website at humanistexperience.com/podcast.
That's humanistexperience.com/podcast. That's where you'll find links to Normal in Arizona,
NARAL Pro-Choice Arizona,
the LD17 Democrats,
and the Arizona Veterans and Military Leadership Alliance.
Special thanks for this episode go to
Our lead unicyclist, Gustavo Youngberg,
our guests,
Lois Ramus-Blaine,
Corey Harris,
Michael Weiser,
Kat Sabine,
and Carol Moss.
The Humanist Experience is produced in collaboration with Unbelievers Media, LLC.
We're your hosts,
Sarah Blaine
and Evan Clark.
And we'll see you next episode. Hey, I'm Sarah Blaine.
You gotta be a little louder.
Hey, I'm Sarah Blaine.
And less creepy frat boy.
What's up?
What's up?
Hey, I'm Sarah Blaine.
I was talking over you, sorry. I like that though.
You're mansplaining.
I am.